March 6, 2001, two masked gunmen attempted to rob a Burrito Express in McHenry, Illinois. But the owner, Raul Briceño, and his employee grabbed long knives, chased the gunman, caught one of them, tore off his mask, and the other gunman suddenly opened fire. Even though they shielded themselves with the assailant's body, Raul Briceño was fatally shot, and both assailants fled. A canvass of the area led to a group of young people who were discovered in a nearby home, including 19-year-old Jennifer McMullan. After countless hours of interrogation, Jennifer finally relented in her denials, copped to being an unwitting getaway driver, and got 27 years in prison. But this is wrongful conviction. Welcome back to Wrongful Conviction. If you're an avid listener of the show, you may think that you've heard it all. I sometimes feel that way. If that's the case, fasten your seatbelt, because today's story is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I don't even know what else to say, and I don't mean to make light of it because it's deadly serious. But this crime is like something out of a Quentin Tarantino movie. And the investigation, if you can call it that, is like something out of the Three Stooges or Keystone Cops or something much more sinister. And, you know, I'm very, very lucky and honored to have the person here who lived through this ordeal, Jennifer McMullan. Thanks for being here. Welcome to Wrongful Conviction.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I always say I'm so happy you're here, but I'm sorry you're here because you should have never been on this show in the first place. This case came with instructions. I mean, literally. And when I say that, first of all, I don't know why this is the first time, but for the first time, we have the co-director of the Illinois Innocence Project, Stephanie Camel. She's been hiding out from us while some of her colleagues have been on the show multiple times, but it's overdue, but I'm really honored to have you here.
Thank you so much for having us and for profiling Jennifer's case. We really appreciate it.
I don't want to embarrass you, but you're kind of a legend in this space. So, you know, it's really great to have you here. And this, you know, I want to go back in time and talk about what you were only 19 when this happened, and talk about what your life was like as you were a law-abiding sort of normal person. You look like a rock star, but besides that, I'm just saying. But Stephanie, am I exaggerating in any way with what I said before? Is this case like this is really insane?
It is. And I think what this case shows is the problem when you get suspect-based investigations versus evidence-based investigations that happen when early on the police decide they think they know who did it. And so everything that comes in, they try to make it fit for that particular person when all the evidence that was coming in led to another group of people that had done this crime.
And spoiler alert, we're going to get to this. Well, first of all, just even saying the crime that Jennifer was convicted of makes me want to throw up in my mouth. I mean, she was convicted of attempted first-degree robbery and murder on the theory of accountability. And you're going to hear more about that as we go along, so stay tuned. But beyond that, this case stinks for so many reasons, not the least of which is, and I'm going to hear myself say it, I'm going to say, Flom, you sound crazy when you're saying that. But before Jennifer's trial, one of the actual perpetrators, and this is a gruesome crime. This is a terrible crime, right?
Yeah, yes.
Everybody should have wanted to get the real people off the streets. But the mother of one of the perpetrators called the cops and said, my daughter did this. And here's why, and here's how, and here's the evidence that she did it, and here's the friends that she did it with. And they basically said, fuck off, lady. We're going to go ahead and convict some other people, right?
Well, they didn't use that language or say that.
No, I editorialized.
Yes. But what they did do in the report, they say, you know, she's giving us information that we have withheld from the public to corroborate confessions, information that Jennifer did not have. But yes, and she said, my daughter said you have the wrong people. Her friends did this. She had information that nobody else knew, and yet they still insisted, and they kept this hidden. This was not known at Jennifer's trial, that there was an alternate suspect group that had confessed to numerous different family and friends prior to her trial to committing this crime.
It's disgusting. It's sickening. It's awful. And I feel like we owe you an apology. So let's go back in time, like in the movies when it gets all foggy and, you know, they do those flashbacks. You were born where?
Libertyville, Illinois.
Libertyville, Illinois.
Yes.
Sounds very all-American.
It is.
Is there like one traffic light, like that kind of place? Or?
I mean, it's a little bit of it's a busy small town, but yeah, it's an amazing place. And then was born there and grew up in Round Lake Beach with my stepfather and mother. My
Only
mother-
child?
No, 3 older siblings.
Uh-huh.
So growing up in my teens, I was the only one in the house. There's 10 years difference between me and the next daughter. So they were all out and getting married and having families, and I was the oops. So I came 10 years later, but yeah, it was a great childhood, never in trouble, was always in sports.
What kind of sports?
So competitive cheer and dance, softball, soccer.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, sports was definitely a passion for me.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So you had it sounds like a nice childhood.
Yes,
No?
absolutely. I had an amazing childhood, amazing parents, siblings, family. It was great. I loved every minute of it.
And quite an athletic resume you have there as well. As someone who didn't make the sports teams in high school, I'm a little jealous, but I'm going to let that slide. That's why I played the guitar and smoked pot instead. But that's a different podcast. We're not going to talk about that now. But anyway, okay. So then let's go back to this crime. Okay, let's fast forward to now. You're 19 years old, and I'm just going to read this because I can't believe the words on the page. So, March 2001, 2 masked men attempted to rob a small restaurant in McHenry, Illinois. The owner, wielding a butcher knife, and his employee chased the 2 men out of the restaurant, and in the ensuing chase, the owner was shot and killed. There's so much more to this than that. This was a burrito express, which is exactly what I would, if I was making a movie, that's what I would make it be,
Yes.
right? A burrito
Yes.
express. And the 2 men who chased down these robbers, which of course, was ill-advised, but I understand the emotion at the time, were Raul Briseño and Eduardo Pardo.
Correct.
And this was on March 6th of 2001, around 7:20 in the evening, right?
Yes, exactly.
So tell us more. What happened on this This is a crazy scene.
Yes. So two masked men, they came in with ski masks, came into the Burrito Express. No one was in there except the owner, Raul Briseño, and his employee, Eduardo Pardo, and they were in the back cutting up food. And the first masked man had a .22 caliber gun, and they were attempting to rob the Burrito Express. Mr. Briseño took the butcher knife that he had and started chasing them with Mr. Pardo following right behind him. They chased them out. Now this is March in northern Illinois. There's ice. It's cold. And one of the perpetrators slips on the ice and falls. And so Mr. Pardo grabs him, takes off his mask so he gets a good look at him, and starts dragging him back to the restaurant. Mr. Briseño, the owner, has yelled at a passing car to call the police, and the perpetrator starts yelling to his friend because he's now been caught. The friend turns around and removes his mask, takes off the ski mask, and starts shooting. He's trying to get him to let his friend go. And Mr. Briseño and Pardo are dragging him back to the Burrito Express. And at one point, Mr. Briseño gets hit. And so Mr. Pardo drops the perpetrator and runs in and calls the police. By the time he comes back out, the 2 men are gone, and Mr. Briseño is on the ground and has been shot.
And was he dead or dying?
He wasn't dead at that time. The police were, Mr. Pardo had called the police. So they came, I think it was about, within 10 minutes of everything starting, they were there, and he died a little bit later.
I wonder why he was dragging him back to the restaurant too.
Well, I think they were trying to drag him back to call the police. And I'll tell you, Mr. Pardo spent a couple of hours that night with law enforcement, and they got composite sketches of each of the suspects that night because they saw them both. He was the only eyewitness, and he saw them both.
Now, I'm guessing the people who are watching on video, it's easier for you, but the people who are listening at home are going, well, wait a minute. we just heard a story of two men
Yes.
who robbed this place.
Yes.
She is clearly not a man.
Right.
So you're probably, if you're at home, you're going like I'm going, Flom, what the fuck are you
Yes.
talking about?
Yes.
This doesn't make any sense.
Yes. So what the police allege was that she was sitting in her car a block or so away, unaware of what was going on, not having planned the crime. And because they came back to her car and she drove another block to their friend's house where they were all hanging out, which is how the police came to even know about her and her friends when they canvassed after the crime. So they said she was sitting in the car. And so because of that, she was then prosecuted. She was the first person they took to trial on the theory of accountability. And in Illinois, even though at her sentencing, the judge said she wasn't a threat to society, she didn't plan on this. She didn't have any idea about it, didn't participate. That because she was sitting in the car and then drove them, she was sentenced to 27 years in prison.
I just gotta pause for a second. So the judge acknowledged that she didn't plan it,
Yes.
didn't participate in it,
Yes.
and didn't know about it.
Yes. Participate, plan, no prior criminal record, wasn't a threat to society. The argument for her trial from her trial counsel was that with accountability, it's that you had to help plan or that you knew it was going to happen. And the finding out afterwards and driving them is she shouldn't have been convicted.
Jennifer, how did you, I mean, you stumbled onto this scene, right, so to speak.
Yes.
I mean, you were, talk about wrong place, wrong time.
Absolutely.
Tell us about that fateful night and what you were doing and how you came upon this chaotic and terrifying scene, and then how you eventually got implicated.
Definitely. So that day I remember running around doing different errands. I had got a call from one of my friends who needed to find somebody to borrow a laptop. So I called another friend and who I knew had one. And I was like, can we come and borrow it? And of course she said, sure, no problem. So I drove to Fox Lake, Illinois, which was where my three co-defendants were at the same house all together hanging out. So I went and grabbed them. We headed out to Twin Lakes, Wisconsin, just young, listening to music, enjoying the car ride. Get to Twin Lakes. We end up finding out that my friend, wasn't allowed to loan out her laptop. I think we stayed there about 15 minutes, just chit-chatting. And then we were on our way, got in the car, the four of us again, and headed out to McHenry, Illinois, where one of my co-defendants had a very close family friend who lived out there. So we're heading out there. As we're coming into McHenry, Illinois, there was the squad cars. We heard like a lot of commotion, ambulance, squad cars. We saw lights coming into town. We ended up going to a smoke shop, dispensary type place. Only one co-defendant went in, and the rest of us stayed in the car. From there, we went to another co-defendant's friend's house, which ended up being right in the vicinity of the Burrito Express. The house sat almost behind up a hill. And as we drove to that house, we did see, the squad cars, the lights, things of that sort. Throughout the evening, we were watching out the back window of that house. We saw detectives. We saw them putting, the yellow markers on the ground, for the different things that they were finding. I ended up not driving home that night because I was scared. I called my mother and told her, something was going on in this area. I'm going to go ahead and stay here for the night. So she was like, okay, you're safe. Everything's good. Just stay there. Come home in the morning. So we just, hunkered down. The family's house that we were at, it was the four of us. The mother came home from work. She worked at a gas station nearby the house. There was a couple younger kids there. And we were just in the house actually watching the news of the scene of the crime and what was going on. Of course you're interested, and it's, happening right behind you. Being young, I had never been in trouble. it was actually like a new a new thing for, for me to see. Like, it's not something that happens that you see every day. So we just stayed tuned and into the news and watching. And then we all eventually went to sleep. While we were sleeping, there was a couple people that were awake in the house. I guess the McHenry police were doing canvassing of the neighborhood. And when they had came to the house, they asked for the people's IDs who were in the house. And they were given my ID out of my purse. I was sleeping. So I heard about that the next morning, waking up, about the officers coming around. And I'm thinking, okay, it's a normal thing that they do, when something that's, it's a tragedy that happened, we
doing
go,
their job.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we go about the next day. One of my co-defendants stays at the house. And I took the other two home. Yeah. It was just, I mean, a simple evening,
Yeah, it sounds like an evening that started off, very normal, became sort of joyous, and then you stumble onto this very surreal scene, which is happening a block away, and you're seeing it on TV while it's right. I mean, it's like very, it's unsettling for sure, and but you had nothing to do with it and nothing to worry about, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
have you ever robbed a burrito place?
No.
I didn't think so.
No.
No. Obviously, that's a stupid question, but I'm getting at. So then how does this thing spiral?
As she said, they canvassed the neighborhood and had questioned some people in the house. What we've learned later is zero in on her friend, her co-defendant, that they thought he was the one who had done this. And
why?
It's hard to know. I don't know. I've heard that they thought he may have gotten away with something else, another crime. We're not really sure. He hadn't really been in trouble before. And what happened was in May 11th, which is almost 2 months later, she's now talked with the police a couple of different times. She's goes in willingly, thinking she's helping, and ends up in a 14.5-hour long day and night of interrogation where over time Jennifer ends up giving what ends up being a false, highly unreliable but false confession to the crime, saying that her friends did do this crime. So at that point, they now have Jennifer on tape falsely confessing that her friends did this crime.
And Jennifer, we hear these stories of these interrogations, and they're heartbreaking. I mean, some of them involve extreme violence, but the psychological torture is a whole nother story. And for you as a 19-year-old girl with no experience in anything like this, being, as you said, a good kid, no one should go through this, don't get me wrong, but what was the experience? 14.5 hours. I mean, think about it. That's such a long time. What take us inside that room and inside your head and your heart when you were going. You had no one there with you, no parent, no lawyer, nothing, right?
Multiple male law enforcement officers, no parent, no attorney, nothing.
It was, I went in willingly. It started off with a lie detector test. It was 2 McHenry County detectives, a Round Lake Beach police officer who was actually a friend of the family. And
of your family?
Yes. And was acting as coming with, accompanying me in the situation as she's going to be okay, assuring my mother, she's going to be okay. I'm going to go with her. They just want to talk to her. You don't need a lawyer. Don't worry.
Her mother specifically asked if she needed to get her a lawyer.
Yes.
Just to protect her.
Yes. So, no. I went ahead and met them at the Round Lake Beach Police Department, without a problem. My mother then got in the car and went home. I went with the 2 detectives and the Round Lake Beach police officer. We traveled to Hillside, Illinois, to a lie detector agency. So we'll rewind back a little bit. I was diagnosed with bipolar and manic depression. So I was on medication. before I went into my interrogation, or sorry, the lie detector test, I was given a dose of one of my medications, which was Klonopin. So Klonopin is used to um, basically help get a good night's rest, good night's sleep, um, a sleep aid. And so I went in for the lie detector test. I'd say maybe 10, 15 minutes. Came back out. They said, everything's good, everything's fine. We're going to wrap it up. We're going to head back to McHenry County Police Department. We just have some paperwork to file, some things to pick up, and, then you can go home. We get back to McHenry County Police Department. They take me into almost like a boardroom with long tables, big screen TV. So they pop in a VHS, and it was footage of the smoke shop, which was called Cloud9. And the footage did show one of my co-defendants in there shopping around, which did happen that night. We did go to the smoke shop. He went there to look around, and the three of the rest of us stayed in the car. Pop in the tape. They asked me to identify who was on the tape. I did so. They then said, okay, well, we're going to go in this room over here, and have a discussion. Me thinking I'm helping, never been in trouble before, didn't understand what was going on. They're telling me everything's okay. I'm like, okay, we go in there, and another detective comes in that I hadn't met that day yet. So it becomes 3 detectives and myself in the room. And he basically just started saying, this is what we want you to say. Tell us what we want to hear and you can go home. We know you didn't have anything to do with it. Just give us this name and all of this can be done and over with. And as I keep saying, we didn't commit this crime. I don't know, what you want me to say. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, this isn't right, Sorry.
Okay.
This went on for over 14 hours as they kept drilling, starting and stopping recording, going in and out of the room. And it was just constant. Just tell us what we want to hear and you can go home. Thank you. I just remember being in a daze from the medication, not understanding what was going on, and just wanting it to be over with. So eventually, as I sat with the detectives after them going in and out, one of them sat with like a yellow legal pad, and he would write down descriptions of things that happened in the crime. Even drew a picture of like the gun that was used and kind of like a description of it. And he said, if there's anything in, that you mess up on, you can glance over here at this legal tablet. And every time I didn't get something right, he would shut off the camera and the recording and just start screaming and drilling over and over. And then I just couldn't take it anymore. And I told them what they wanted to hear, just so it could be over with. Not knowing and understanding what was really going on. I just wanted to go home.
14 and a half hours with no sleep, on Klonopin, in a state of just unbelievable pressure and duress, and being bullied like that. Yeah, you probably, probably would have confessed to killing Archduke Ferdinand. You know what I mean? Like, and no one would blame you for that either. And that's why we see so many false confessions. The numbers are staggering. And it's so important for people that are listeners to know how these things happen. So good that you're here, because when you're on the stand, when you're in a jury box and you end up hearing a case where really the only evidence is a confession, you can't, you gotta remember what you're hearing today. You gotta remember Jennifer's words or tears and think, well, why isn't there other corroborating evidence? And if the confession didn't make sense, which it didn't, even though they were feeding you the information. And Stephanie, I want to turn back to you because there were glaring problems with this confession that an earnest actor at any stage, law enforcement, prosecutor, should have had no problem discerning the red flags here, right?
It's highly unreliable. I'll just step back too, because in this 14 and a half hour day, she was at one police station, then they drive over an hour to where she had the lie detector test. One of the things that we see in the lie detector test with the person, there were only 4 questions asked, but what happened was she'd been given her medication, and after that, after they come out and say, oh, a couple answers were highly suspicious, and so then they start trying to, what really happened, they didn't believe her, and so she starts breaking down there. They then drive her back, and they start feeding information, which happens. Oftentimes people learn of the crimes, whether it's on television or, as they are being interrogated, they learn information from the interrogators about the crime, such that when they finally falsely confess, they use information that they've learned throughout the interrogation. And so they end up driving back to where she's doing the interrogations. They're doing the interrogations late at night. And there are 2 different videotaped interrogations. In the first one, she starts breaking down and giving them information, but again, highly unreliable. They take a break. And while they said they did not give her her medication until after the second interrogation, the video stops recording. But on the audio, you hear a man say, "Do you want coffee with your medication?" And then the next video starts like another half hour later, where she gives the final, they then take the false confession from that first videotape, wasn't really accurate. So then they do another videotape and they get the confession that ends up being used at her trial, which is more accurate. But again, none of the withheld facts from the crime did she know, did her co-defendants know, had no idea. And but they had the confession. And I think, as you know, and I've you learn this the more you do this work. We used to think that if somebody confessed, well, then it must be true.
Right, because if we go out on the street and ask the first 500 people we run into, would you ever confess to a crime you didn't commit?
We all say
everyone's
no.
going to say no.
Right.
I'm smart. I'm tough. I would never fall for their tricks. I would never. But we know that's not true. Almost everyone has a breaking point.
Well, and juveniles are even much more highly susceptible to providing false confessions. I think there was a study done over 18 years of wrongful convictions of juveniles, and I think it was like 44% was the number that had provided false confessions.
44%?
Yes, over this 18-year period in this study. Yeah.
Stephanie, I want to give people some useful advice on the chance that I hope none of our listeners are ever going to find themselves in a situation like you were in. But if you could go back in time and be a voice, an angel in Jennifer's ear, what would you have told her to do differently that might have prevented this from happening in the first place? Because there were things that she couldn't possibly have known that she could have done, right?
Yes. And I think, you know what, I've learned in doing this work. I'll just tell you, 10 years ago, even, I would have done exactly what Jennifer would have done, which is when they're coming to ask you about a situation, you think I'm being helpful, and so I'll answer whatever questions. You're told that if you have nothing to hide, why would you need a lawyer? And that is so incorrect. And so what I would have said to her mom and her is no, you don't go to that police station with a family friend or by yourself, and you go with an attorney, and you know, make sure that you have representation as you're trying to be helpful to the police. But at any time, you know, an attorney could have said, this is not going to go on anymore. She kept asking to go home and thought she was going to go home. And they kept saying, oh, we will take you home, you know, after the lie detector test. Oh, but we just have to stop off here. And so it gets longer and longer and longer. And people, again, social science study shows people's defenses start to break down after about an hour and a half.
Wow.
And oftentimes they'll say anything just to get out of the situation, thinking, well, the evidence we'll get out of the situation, and then they'll find out the evidence and it'll show that I didn't do it, you know? And so people break down and will falsely confess thinking, well, the evidence will show, and they'll go get the actual perpetrators.
Right. But we know even with
Yeah.
Jeffrey Deskovic, where his attorney presented DNA evidence that proved he was innocent,
Yes.
and the jury believed the false confession over the DNA evidence. So,
Yes.
you know, just like people think they would never confess, jurors think that no one would ever confess. So
Yes.
a confession is the most damning thing there can be. And if you find yourself in a room like that, they will find a way to get you to confess. And, you know, ironically, we know juveniles and people with different kinds of challenges are most likely to confess. Also
Yes.
military people, because they're used to obeying
Yes.
used to obeying orders. They're much more likely to confess.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind. It seems counterintuitive. Okay, so
Right.
back to the story. So now you confess. Did you think you were going home after that? Did you go home? What happened after that?
I remember falling asleep in the corner of the interrogation room. I remember a blanket being thrown on me. The next morning, I woke up in a holding cell. I woke up to a detective throwing a bag of McDonald's breakfast at me and saying, "You need to get up. We're charging you with first-degree murder."
Wow.
I then got up. They shackled me, put me in a squad car, and took me to McHenry County Jail.
Okay, so now you're in McHenry County Jail. First degree murder. Did they set bail?
Yes, I had, I remember it was $1 million.
$1 million bail.
Mhm.
Did your family have $1 million?
No, they did not.
And so you go to trial. And who represented you?
A attorney by the name of Steven Schwartzbach. So it was last day of the trial, and jury went out for deliberations. We returned to our home to have dinner. We were then contacted by my lawyer, and he was told that the jury was arguing. They couldn't come to a decision, and we needed to come back to the courthouse. We get back and we're waiting for, you know, court to start, for the jury to come in. And they again said that the jury was arguing. The judge I had at that time, Judge Arnold, was stated to the jury that they had to hurry up and come up with a decision. And the jury was brought in, and I was found guilty.
When they were coming back into the courtroom, I mean, the pressure is unimaginable. You know, you're literally looking at the rest of your life flashing before your eyes. Did you think that they would see the truth?
I had prayed that they would, but I honestly think at that point I still didn't understand the severity of what was going on. I didn't, you know, I had hoped that it would come back not guilty, you know, but with all the things that I had been through with McHenry County already, I just didn't know.
Sounds like it was just like a nightmare that you kept waiting to wake up from, you know. And maybe that was the way you coped with it. It was just like, sounds like you were almost like a little detached, which I mean, no one could fault you for that either. So the jury comes back and finds you guilty. I mean, after all this horrible stuff you'd already been through, this was obviously the worst moment of your life. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And can you take us inside your soul in that moment, or inside the courtroom? Like, what was your family there? How did you react?
As he read the verdict and it came back guilty, I remember watching the judge like everything was in slow motion. And I turned around and looked at my mom, and I just saw her face drop. In disbelief. And then they took me away.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like they took her to prison with you. I mean, as a dad, I can't even begin to imagine. And here you were, someone who had never done anything wrong. Not this, not anything. It's like, it seems like it's too often. Those are the type of people these things end up, the people that end up being subjected to these wrongful convictions. So you go to prison. It's a life sentence?
27 years at 100%, which means
no parole,
no good days, no credit for school, no contracts for good time. 27 years, 100% straight through.
And the judge, got to go back to the judge. Stephanie, I mean, have you ever heard anything like this statement that this judge made?
Well, you see the sentencing documents and everything that's checked and written out, and on the sentencing documents stating, that she did not participate in the planning or carrying out of this, that she wasn't a threat to society, that she'd never been in trouble with the law. But because she drove them, he sentenced her harshly to 27 years in prison.
And the crazy irony is that the people that she drove also had nothing to do with it.
Yes. And when we get to that, you'll see where all the evidence points to. But exactly.
All right, well, let's get to that, because this is what makes this thing even more insane.
Yes.
In case you thought it couldn't get worse. Here we go.
Yes.
So take us to this, because that's what's like, literally my brain is melting down thinking about this. She was convicted of not participating, not planning, not being involved, but driving people who also didn't plan, participate, or weren't involved to a house that had nothing to do with the crime either.
Correct. Although, of course, law enforcement said her friends committed this crime. And so they are saying her two friends did rob and commit this, or attempted to rob and then ended up committing this crime. And so they think because she was sitting in the car, and if they had done what they said they did, that she drove these two people who had committed this heinous crime to the house a block away.
Right, but let us not forget that if that theory was true, which it wasn't, and they had every reason to know that it wasn't, even if that were true, that would mean that if you at home, I'm speaking to everybody who's listening, or me or you, or just sitting in our car.
Yeah.
And a couple of friends come up and go, hey, can I get a ride down the block? And you give them a ride, not knowing that they may have done anything. Yeah. You can now be convicted and sentenced to 27 years in prison with no good time and no nothing. Yeah. I mean, that is, I hope that's making everybody else as angry as it makes me, because it's absurd. It's actually absurd. But the other thing about this that I got to go back to is the fact, because I hate this shit, right? The fact is that they had to have known, because of this conscientious mom, this conscientious citizen who called up and said, hey, you guys got this wrong.
Yes.
This is what really happened. And I'm the mom, so I know.
Yes.
That should be, there should be so much credibility in that phone call.
Yes.
And she had the accurate information.
Yes. So,
But
yeah,
Jennifer didn't.
right.
Her confession sucked. It
Yes.
was wrong in
I-
so many ways. And her co-defendant's confession was wrong in different ways.
Yes, exactly. And so what happened and what was never disclosed to Jennifer's trial counsel was there was an alternate suspect group that had repeatedly confessed to family and friends of committing this crime.
Confessed, bragged, whatever they were doing. Right?
Well, exactly. But the mom in November of 2001 that called in to the police, and she originally called in anonymously, but by the end of the call, she has revealed who she is. And she says, "My daughter told me you have the wrong people in jail." Now, Jennifer's out on bond waiting trial for this crime, that her two friends did this, and she saw it happen. And the chief is writing in the police report that the mother has given him two pieces of information about the crime that they withheld from the public to corroborate confessions. And so the mother tells him these things. She says that her daughter was driving in the car and saw her friends run into the Burrito Express and then saw them run out. And the owner yelled at her to call the police.
Wow.
So that's one piece of evidence they withheld. She also said that her daughter saw the person that was doing the shooting come back and hit Mr. Brazeno in the head with the butt of the gun to knock him over, to let go of his friend, and they ran off, got in her car. Or actually, I think they ran off back to the house because the alternate suspect group was at her mom and stepdad's home, which was also close to the Burrito Express. But they met back there, and because there was the struggle and the gunshot and the knife, it was a bloody struggle, and they had the alternate suspect and they were dragging him. He got cut up on his shins from the ice, but also his hand got a cut from the knife. And so they run back to her house. They then leave the house because they end up burning their clothes because there's so much blood. And 8 weeks to 10 weeks later, they took her car, they stole it and took it over the border in Wisconsin and torched the car because they couldn't get the blood out from the back seat of the car. Jennifer's car in 2020 still, when we were going in for DNA testing, it was still impounded by the police. They had it in their custody. 19 years later, they never found anything in the car.
Because it wasn't there.
Nothing was in there.
Yeah.
Right. So you have this mother calling in. She ends up identifying herself. She identifies the two friends of her daughters and her daughter, who they were. Her daughter has confessed to other people. She even confessed told two different police officers when she had been in trouble. She was in trouble often with the law. They knew her. They were talking to her about something else, and she told them about this. And they didn't take her seriously. They said she was bragging and trying to get street cred.
Oh, yeah.
And so then one of the perpetrator who got caught and dragged told a roommate. And the roommate said, "You need to talk to an attorney," and took him to see a defense attorney. And he told them. He told the defense attorney with his roommate sitting there, "Me and my friend did this. We were trying to rob the Burrito Express. They have other people, they've got these people." And the defense attorney told him to be quiet, don't say anything. They already have other people for this crime.
How do we know all that?
Well, in her co-defendant's third trial or second trial, it's complicated. He got on the stand and under oath testified to that.
Wow.
That he took this other alternate suspect to the defense attorney because he was so upset and so scared. He was also a young man. I think he was 15 or 17 himself. And, they hadn't intended to kill someone. They had intended to rob for money. And he had confessed to his friend and then went and was scared and cried and confessed to this defense attorney. And the defense attorney told him not to say anything since they had other people that they were looking at for the crime.
So sad on so many levels, the loss of life, the loss of your
Yes.
20 years. So Jennifer, you get sent to maximum security prison.
Yes.
And I mean, I hate to take you back there. You probably never want to think about it again, but can you describe for us what that was like? Because I think we can't talk enough about how our prisons in America are like from the freaking Middle Ages. Was that your experience?
Absolutely. You go in there, and the first introduction you get to prison is intake. And back then it was 36 days of hell. No phone calls, no mail. You can't write your family and tell them I'm okay. This is where I'm at right now.
Or I'm not okay.
Yeah, it's the it's the next step in. It's when you go through something like this, it's like you go through stages. Like, okay, I know I'm wrongfully convicted, but at 19 they're sending me to an adult max women's facility. I have to prepare myself for this. You finally get there and you're like, okay, I'm here. I don't know what's going on. I know that I'm innocent, but now I have to take this next step, this next stage. And the things that the stages you went through before that, you never heal from any of it because you're just facing the next one, trying to get through every day, trying to get, and with the prisons, it's just, you're a number. You get processed. You get the bare minimum. They do what they have to do, to get you through the motions, get you in there, get you to the doctor, get you to general population. And from there, it's all on you, to figure out what you're going to do every day, to help yourself get through it. Schooling, programs, different things that you can do, to stay sane.
So if you had to pick sort of 5 or 7 words to describe the type of, things you were suffering through there, could you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
it would absolutely be the noise for me as well. Noise and not having any peace on top of what you've already been through. It's excruciating. And being in prison and being innocent of the crime that you're convicted of. One time I told somebody I've never felt so alone around so many people.
That's well said. So then let's get to the good stuff. So how did you end up connecting with the Innocence Project, the Illinois Innocence Project? And then how did you, I want to hear about we heard the miserable wrongful conviction, but you're here.
Yes.
And there's still work to be done. And we're going to get to that. And we're going to talk to our audience, tell everybody what they can do to help. But how did this come to your attention? And, how did we get to this place where we're sitting in a studio here at the Innocence Network conference in New Orleans, looking at her smile?
Yes.
And her tattoos as well.
Yes.
Lots of tattoos.
That she's gotten since.
And so how'd that happen? How'd you do it?
You wrote, was it you that wrote to the project? I'm trying to remember initially.
So there was like this resource book floating around. It was actually a male inmate wrote it and got it published. And then we could, write for different books and things like that. So I actually wrote for one of the resource books, was flipping through it one day, and I found a paralegal out of Lincoln, Illinois by the name of Fonda Robbins. So I contacted her. I sent her paperwork, copies of everything I had. which I had done multiple times, to different pro bono lawyers, different states, like, here it is in black and white. Can you help me? If not, can you forward this to somebody who can? I went through years and years of doing that, hundreds of dollars of sending out packages of court paperwork and, discovery and paperwork, pointing to the alternate suspects. And finally, I, got blessed with her contacting me, and she said, I need you to stop whatever you're doing right now, write this address, and send them a copy of your paperwork. So it was actually to the Illinois Innocence Project, and I went ahead and contacted the project. They sent me the forms to fill out, and I also sent them a packet of the paperwork I had with it. Some months had went by, didn't hear anything, and all of a sudden I got a call to go up to the visiting room, which was a surprise to me.
How many years had you been in by now?
This was
it 2015, 2016?
Yeah.
Or 20, so she'd been in
14 years.
14 years.
Yeah. So yeah, I get a call to go to the visiting room, which was unusual. My visits with family were always planned because they live so far away. It was 4.5 hours one way for them to come visit. My mom had passed 8 years into my incarceration. I had my stepfather left and my older siblings. Of course, all of them, had lives and, of course, still loved and cared for me. But I always knew when they were, coming to see me. So I get up there, go through the whole strip search situation, get in there, and this man comes around the corner and he says, Jennifer. And I said, yes, sir. He said, do you know who I am? And I said, no. Oh, sorry. And he said, my name is John Hanlon, and I work with the Illinois Innocence Project. We then went into a private room, and as I turned the corner, I want to say there was about 6 or 7 people there, including students, supporters, and other attorneys. There just to listen and to help, finally. So we talked for a little while. They said, of course they were going to do their background looking, through the paperwork and see, if my case was, eligible, if it qualified for them to take. And 1 year and 1 day later from that first visit with them, I signed my papers for them to represent me.
John started on her case, and as soon I joined the project about a year and a half later, and he brought me on to Jennifer's case and turned it over to me almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And so I started in 2019 on her case.
Wow. And then you got busy.
We did. And, interestingly, we filed that DNA motion and actually were in court same day with the alternate suspect, argued it right the day before the courts shut down with COVID. To get the agreed, to get the evidence shipped out for DNA testing. So we were able to get that done right before. And then we worked during COVID to get the evidence, sent out for DNA testing. But yeah, we got busy.
And what happens next?
Well, so Jennifer had been represented up to a point, and then her case was basically dormant. She had appealed and done a post-conviction that had gotten thrown out and then overturned. And so her case had been sitting for a while, but all along her co-defendant, who they allege was the actual shooter, was tried by McHenry County 3 different times. His trial, his convictions kept getting overturned by the appellate court immediately because evidence kept being left out. The judge wouldn't let evidence in. They now knew of the alternate suspects. They now knew of, all of that. But there would be things that the judge, as we go in and litigate cases, defense attorneys and prosecutors are making motions to bring stuff in, keep stuff out. Critical pieces of evidence kept being ruled to not be allowed in. So her co-defendant,
Are we allowed to know his name?
oh yes, Ken Smith.
So Ken Smith is a
Yes.
co-defendant. He also was convicted.
Oh yeah. So he was convicted a year later and was sentenced to 67 years, I think, in
Wow.
prison as the person who actually, they said was the shooter.
And by the way, it's not lost on me that this is a crime that was committed, as we go back to the beginning, by two men.
Yes.
And
right.
they end up with one woman and one man.
Yes. Well,
And
her two other co-defendants took plea deals.
Oh, wow.
So one took a plea deal for 5 years.
Jesus.
The other one, who was 15 and falsely confessed the day after Jennifer falsely confessed, because they came to him and told him your other three friends have confessed and are pointing the finger, and you need to. And he gave a very false, unreliable confession, didn't have any of the facts correct. When they gave him choices of the gun, he chose an automatic, not a 28.
How could he know? He didn't
Yes.
know.
Yeah. And he was under the influence of drugs too during his false confession. But
And what did he end up getting?
he got 20 years with his plea deal, but he testified against Jennifer.
As a 15-year-old.
Yes. He would have been 17 by the time he took his plea deal, but he testified against Jennifer, wrote like four months later apologizing for lying. He wouldn't testify against her co-defendant, Ken Smith, in his first trial. That trial got overturned. They go to retry him again. In the second trial, he gets on the stand and gives his false confession, testimony. On cross-examination, without any pressure, he admits that he just lied. Everything he said was a lie, that Ken didn't do this, they didn't do this, but he had to stick with his false confession or they were going to revoke his plea deal. He admitted this on the stand in the second trial. They then prosecute him for perjury, and he gets 5.5 more years. But he says right there in Ken's second trial, we didn't do this. That trial gets overturned. They do a third trial. That one on appeal does not get overturned. And so he's represented pro bono by a large law firm in Chicago. And they...
Ken Smith.
Yes. File a habeas petition. And ultimately, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals exonerates Ken. And they say that there is no way a rational jury could have found him guilty. All the evidence pointed to the alternate suspects, and they ordered his immediate release. And so what happened was, in April of 2021, we get DNA back excluding Jennifer and her 3 co-defendants from the key pieces of evidence in the crime. In May, the Seventh Circuit gives their ruling. And let me just say, these are 3 judges from different political sides of the spectrum. A Trump appointee, an Obama appointee, and a Clinton appointee unanimously agree that all the evidence points to the alternate suspects, and there's no way Ken Smith could have done this, and they order his release. So this is not a political one side or the other. This is everyone agreeing here.
So he was released after how many years?
He was tried the first time a year later, so he would have been released 18 years.
18 years.
Years.
Jesus. And what about the
in
other
May
2?
of 2021. So we get the DNA results April 2021. He's released May of 2021. And that's the point where the state comes and offers Jennifer a plea deal.
And what did that look like?
We expected that they would, do what had been, that she would be exonerated, that they would say, look, we got it wrong. She needs to be released. And they said, no, we still know we got it right with Ken. They're just wrong. 3 juries convicted him. It didn't matter that they kept not hearing all the evidence. And so they said, but she's already spent way too long in prison, even if she's guilty for what, she was convicted of. It's been way too long. It was a harsh sentence. So if she will plead guilty to armed violence, which again, she never participated in the crime, we'll let her out for time served. But if she resumes her post-conviction litigation to prove her innocence, we will revoke her plea deal and she will be returned to prison, even though they've said she's already spent way too long in prison. We told her, look, this is your decision. You can either take this deal and get out immediately, but you're going to have this Class X felony of armed violence on your record, or we're going to keep representing you, and we'll file your successive post-conviction petition and litigate your innocence, but you're going to be sitting in prison for at least another few years while we do this.
And that's what it's like a Sophie's choice.
Yeah.
Right.
Our only option now is clemency, which we filed and presented a clemency petition to the Prisoner Review Board in January on her behalf, because that's not a legal proceeding. That is Jennifer's only way to be exonerated.
A pardon. I mean, it really needs to be a full pardon, right?
Right, which we're asking for a pardon.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, and you richly deserve one. So, okay, so you finally you accept this plea. It's bittersweet, obviously, but you're going home. What was that like when you were finally? Where were you freed from? Were you freed from the courthouse, from a jail, from the prison? What was it like taking those first steps out into the free air?
It was such an amazing day. And the first part, what made it so amazing is, so I lost my mom 8 years into my incarceration. I was actually released on her birthday. And, you know, a big part of me taking the plea was being home to help my family. I had already saw my mother in a casket, shackled from head to toe. About 6 years ago, my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. And I wanted to make it home. And for him to see me home before he didn't know who I was. So I was so thankful for that. Going to court that day was a hard decision. You know, at first, when I gave my false confession, people would say, well, why would you do that if you really didn't commit this crime? You don't know what it feels like until you're going through it. And even now, they said, well, why would you plead guilty to that charge if you're innocent, if you didn't commit this crime? Again, you don't know what it feels like until you're put in that situation, you know? But going to court that day was hard in the manner of being in court and having to plead guilty to something right? I didn't do.
Yeah.
You know, as they're reading, you know, the description of the crime and what went on and my so-called role, you know, in the crime, I just stood there and cried. When I left from McHenry County, I was 19 years old, going to prison. Coming back to McHenry to get released, I was almost 40. And as I walked into the bullpens and entering, you know, the county jail, I had officers who became sergeants and lieutenants throughout the years that I was, you know, incarcerated. And they said, finally, the truth is coming out and you guys are going home. Everybody all these years has known the truth and, you know, has known that you guys, you didn't commit this crime. But hearing the events of the crime and standing in a courtroom and having to plead guilty to this and go through that again, it was very difficult, but it was something that I feel that I had to do.
And you did. And you maintained your dignity throughout. And everyone will know that you didn't do this. But what happened to the other two co-defendants? So Ken was exonerated.
Yes.
Thankfully.
Although they fought his as you know, in Illinois, he was exonerated. The Seventh Circuit said he had to be released immediately. All the evidence pointed to the alternate suspects, but in Illinois, you then have to go for a certificate of innocence. The state fought that, but you go back to the same court where you were wrongfully convicted. with the same judges and prosecutors who've prosecuted you over the years. And so they fought that. But the one young man who took he took a plea deal and got 5 years, he was the other person that they did not allege was involved in the crime. And I'm not sure where he is, but the other young man that got 20 years and then the 5.5 when he admitted to perjuring, also he's out, but I'm not sure. We know more about Ken's because his journey, we've been in contact with his attorneys more and know what's going on in his case more than the other two over time.
Which firm represented him?
Jenner and Block represented him pro bono for 13 years.
I want to shout them out.
And then Lovey now.
On Lovey, great.
Is now representing him in
All
his
right.
certificate of innocence and on.
I kind of figured if it's Illinois, Lovey's
Yes.
got to have a hand in
Yes,
it. They're
yep,
always
yep.
on the right side of
Yep.
history when it
Quinn
comes to
and
these
Russell,
things.
are his
So
attorneys.
shout out
yeah.
to Lovey and Lovey for their
Yes.
great work. And with that, I'm going to need a deep breath after this story. Once again, I just have so much respect for you, and I'm so glad that you shared this story with me and our amazing audience. And now we turn to my favorite part of the show, which is called Closing Arguments. As I said, Closing Arguments works like this. First of all, I thank you both once again for being here, Jennifer and Stephanie, and for sharing your, incredible story. And then I now have the privilege of turning off my microphone and kicking back in my chair and just listening to anything else you want to say. So
No, she is.
Stephanie,
Yes.
I'm sure you have a few parting shots. So
Mm-hmm.
why don't you go first and then just hand the mic off to Jennifer.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you so much, Jason, for asking us here and highlighting Jennifer's story. It's a privilege for us to get to share her story. One thing I'd like to say is when these wrongful convictions happen, as we take on these cases, we're very cognizant of the fact that you have someone who was a victim of a crime. And we are very, before we take on a case, we do so much investigation and testing to make sure, because what happens when someone's wrongfully convicted, you now have another victim of a crime. And the original victim never got true justice because the real perpetrators are still out there and often committing other crimes. And so it's really important that we represent these people that are wrongfully convicted. And I want victims of crimes to understand that that's what we're doing. We are not trying to get perpetrators out of jail. She was a victim herself. And so it's just important. And for someone in your position to get the word out there, we're working on individual cases, putting our heads down and representing our clients. But the fact that we can educate the public that wrongful convictions do happen, and we want justice, and real justice is getting the true perpetrators in crime and getting innocent people out of prison. So thank you, Jennifer.
It's an honor to be here. I want to thank everybody tremendously for the work that you do. All the Innocence projects around the world. Because if it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't be here. And all the hard work that you do. It's been a long journey. Good days, bad days. But I'm here. Taking it one day at a time. And I just appreciate life so much more. And if there was one thing that I could tell everybody, it can happen to anybody. And it happens more than people know. I met people every day, where different things went on in their case. And they just didn't have the strength to fight, But I knew that I had to keep on fighting. Another big thing is know your rights. When it comes to interrogations, lawyers, Miranda's rights, look into everything and, get the knowledge behind it. I know that If I knew and I understood at a young age, I don't think that they would have went that far. If I knew then what I know now.